art has function, but it definitely can have a purpose, and the purpose can also be just pleasure. I think architecture is the mother of all arts. When I look at, say, a Leonardo da Vinci, or you look at the Roman architecture, let's say, or you look at even before that, Brunelleschi, and you look at Michelangelo, they were essentially artists. They were not formal architects as such, but they had a scientific background. And I think what architecture really talks about is being logical and being true in its formation. So if you're true and honest in the purpose which architecture wants to be made for, or is constructed for, it is art. It is also art. That is point one. Point two, it's also something that you enjoy just like you would art. So it has to give you pleasure. It has to be beautiful, because not only the user uses a building, but the building stands to be witnessed by everybody who passes by it. So if a building is an eyesore, it becomes one stress point in the city for everyone else. And I think that becomes a huge responsibility. So there's this whole idea of science that goes into it. And there's this whole idea of beauty that goes into it. I also like to think of it as very musical, because music is about spaces. If you look at music and rhythm, it's between a note and another, there is a little space. And when these spaces change, you get a pattern, or you get a phrase, and then you get a musical note. In the same way, architecture is about spaces. And so if you think of the way the spaces are arranged in a building, you could make a musical note, and therefore a symphony if the building was still bigger. And I think all its elements are the different nuances that a musical overture can have. And you hear something in the background, you hear something in the foreground. And symphony has hundreds of violinists and musicians, pianists, percussion, and yet you hear it as one sound, but it's made of so many sounds. And so architecture is, for me, a similar analogy, where you talk of it as a symphony of so many different elements coming together, as is art. So it's kind of all layered, complex. It's not one or the other. It's all of it together. And people keep discussing what art should be, what you should call art, and what you shouldn't call art. And in the earlier times, there would be ideas about people like, say, Plato, who said that art is something perfect, and that is only an idea, because you can never reach perfection. And so everything that you do is only an attempt to get to that perfect image that you have in your head. So whereas someone like Kant talked about art as something that is sensual and gives pleasure. So people who really enjoy being outdoors, or looking at the sky, looking at the sun, or brings a smile onto your face when you see a beautiful piece of art, I'm like, that's enough, isn't it? The artist doesn't have to do more if he can invoke a smile in his consumer. Or you're happy to see a beautiful mountain, and that's about proportions. So something that's huge and overwhelming and shows a sense of rigor, something that shows me passion. I would attribute all these qualities to art, and this that in turn that makes me happy or gives me pleasure. When you look at Anish Kapoor's work and you see the wax being splattered on the wall, I forget what that one was particularly called, but and then you hear this large thud, and I think he was talking about the killings that happened due to terrorism, and there was so much written about it. But when you see it uphand like this, firsthand, that's when there's your heart misses a beat, and you realize how much pain this can cause, and what it really means to lose somebody through these kind of bombings and what this violence really means. So that the consequence or the weight of an event can be very beautifully messaged, given out to the audience through art. So art, I think, is a powerful medium with the right artist. For me, that architecture has a power of that, and if architecture can have that power, if the inside of a space can have that power, then yes, it can change behavior. And imagine this on a larger scale, where the catharsis is so much more that it can impact a community and their thinking. And if something is well made, you tend not to abuse it. Batista talked about the idea of the parametrics, and so this is nothing new that we are entering. And it's something that Zaha Hadid does in terms of deconstruction, where it's something that is broken down as art, something that is an incomplete installation as art, and that's an idea. So when art becomes something that is talking about ideas and not actually skill, then there's a complete different understanding of art. So perfection in what sense? If art has to play a role of message making and message giving, then it's not about getting the object to be perfect. But at the same time, if I have to look at architecture, I cannot imagine a building that doesn't work as an idea for people to use, because it has to have a certain kind of function. And for a building to be perfect, there has to be balance, and for the experience to be happy, there has to be proportion. Now, these are kind of underlying principles that nobody tells you when you enter a building, but you sense it because certain buildings feel better than the others. You walk into an old stone building as against a concrete building, the sound, the volume of air, the weight, the mass of the building, and the entire experience is very different from the one that's made with concrete and brick. I think proportions and order are very important, and they can't be learned by a formula. Although we have the very famous golden ratio, 1:1.6, and the Fibonacci sequence and serial, and all of that, and everything in the world is using the proportion of 1:1.6. We know that, and that does bring a certain sense of order. That does bring a certain sense of immediate engagement. That does bring a certain sense of calm. That does bring beauty immediately. Even your human body is divided or proportioned in the same numbers in the golden ratio, 1:1.6. So yes, there is something to do with geometry. There is something definitely to do with proportion. There is something that one talks about as compositions, tectonics, semantics, spatiality. So yes, these are not hollow ideas to my mind. They're very solid, but they can't be taught like you would teach math. They have to be practiced. They have to be experienced. They have to be sensed. They have to be felt. And then one evolves one's own philosophy of what they want to do. There's always something that breaks the rule to make the rule. So yes, that's something that's absolutely lovely. It's art. It brings a smile to your face. Something that's kind of leaned and yet not fallen. It's also metaphorical. If I look at it, like we have so many leanings, that doesn't mean we fail or we fall, but we're able to come back, bounce back. So I think that it's how you look at it and interpret it. And I think it's also about the act of the human being. I mean, the work, the rigor that went into it, and then this happened, and yet okay, let it stay. So there's also this not the drive to make everything perfect, also perfect. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to drive towards getting everything structured. There is a lot of ambiguity, and so I'm a great believer of ambiguity, to allow interpretations, to allow a sense of lack of clarity, a little sense of incompletion, because that keeps it going. If something is complete, it's dead. If something is correct, it's over. And so there's no interpretation beyond that. So you kind of nudge, you defy, you challenge stability when you're inclined. What if the wall, instead of being just a room, was in larger buildings and in the urban areas, a water tank? And so could you start building buildings which had thick walls, or at least some of its walls were so thick that they could house water, harvest water which came from the rains, and use that not only as a storage place for water, as a tank, but it automatically begins to cool. And at the same time, you are rainwater harvesting, and you are using as a building material. So you have the several different attributes or characteristics of water being used then, therefore, to create a poetic. And so the sound of water, the look of water, it blends with whatever you put it into. So there's a certain kind of transparency it has. The sound in terms of the way it can, it's such a fluid material that it can fit into anything. And all of that comes together in this installation, where we said, human beings are made of 80% water. And so what if we made these plastic bags that looked like people with big arms and big legs, and we kind of made their hands a little bigger, and big toes and big fingers, and we filled it with water, and then we just hung a whole bunch of them, and people had to wade through them. For an architect, of course, there is always a purpose, there's always a program, there's always a patron, there's always some function that he has to serve at the end. And I'm not going to get into that. Let's say that's a given. Until you don't achieve that, you're not even talking about architecture. But if having achieved the function that I need to sort of create or service a certain need, then what else does architecture have to do? And in that sense, what canvas am I left with? Yeah, I think I'm left with the canvas of a void, and you're creating different kinds of voids within that. So it's like almost like saying, space as the third frontier, like they say in Star Wars, and you're really creating this as if the whole air is like a big sea of air, and I'm creating buoys that float in it, and then you're looking at issues like or ideas of gravity and density and weight and mass. And so these are my parameters with which I will these are my intangible parameters with which I like to conceive of the architecture. And this is also going to be sensed. You're never going to know what the weight of a building is, but you will feel the weight of a building when you walk into it, or you will feel the density of the air when you walk into it, based on the volume, and you will feel the quality of light. It's almost like you can hear the light. The light speaks. So I think those are my elements, and so. The canvas is a space, the emptiness with which we work with, and I would really want to thank the Kiranandar Museum for creating this platform for architects and art lovers to talk on various issues, and especially this one where art meets design, because I don't think the two are different, and I don't think that they should be dealt with differently, but each one feeds on the other. And especially now, when the entire society has suddenly found so much more meaning from art. Thank you very much.